listen to us. So I was telling you that Anandana, as a filmmaker, as an educationist, is multi-talented, and all her work has been showcased in various film festivals. And many of our students have watched your films, and they come back to me and say, "Ma'am, we saw you sneezing in your film." And again, yes, that's a very important shot. That is how the film begins. And she has been awarded for her amazing films. She has been a part of several juries in at various levels in cinema. And today she's with us and talking to us about how to pick up a topic from everyday life. Without much ado, I just give this session to Ananna. Anna, the stage is all yours. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Yuki. That was very kind of you. And I just want to tell everybody who's gathered here today that I will be sort of sharing a screen while I'm talking, but it's not fancy because, like I said at the outset, that we have a lot of competition for bandwidth. So I don't know who all wants to use it and who all may want to sort of um, get access to the materials that I'm showing. So the names will be available for you and you can then look them up later. And as it is, I believe that it's important to just have a conversation and not necessarily uh, spoon feed you all because when you are studying or reading a master's, the idea is for you to be as creative as you can. And this is the best space to do that. And I'm very grateful that you've invited me for this webinar. I was telling uh, Dr. Yuki the other day that a friend of mine told me it's like talking into the galaxy. So this is my trip into hopefully a fun space. So I'm going to share the screen now, and I hope it goes smoothly. And then we'll talk a little bit more about why I came up with this topic. And essentially, today I will not only give you examples of some projects that I have enjoyed as an audience member, but also talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of some of my work and try and correlate it with how we can, in each of our spheres, whether it is citizen journalism, whether it is mainstream journalism, whether it's development communication, or just art for art's sake, can really sort of move in a direction which is not just satisfying in terms of eyeballs, that is, an applause, but also in terms of outcomes and what we really do with our skills. So let's see if this works. All right. Have I been able to not bad, smooth enough?
Imran, it is yet to come on the screen, but yes, we have started looking at one screen which has been shared with you by you, but the screen is
Okay.
still blank.
Oh, all right. Are we able to see something now?
Not yet.
Okay. To me, it's you're sharing a screen and I can see.
And I've stopped sharing.
Yeah, maybe now.
No. Yes, now it
Yes,
is.
yes.
Okay. Simple black and white and a little bit of gray. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
So yeah, essentially, I think that sort of sums up uh, life as a filmmaker for me, which is black and white and a little bit of gray. And that is because, you sometimes choose to put your ideology and your art and your technology behind a particular concept, and you really commit to it. And even though, we have a lot of technology around us today and it's easy to make things quickly, you really have to commit at a level which is deeper, sometimes deeper than your own relationships. Because you're obsessed with the idea, you want to fashion it, you want to bring it out, and you want everybody to feel the same instinct that you felt when you decided to embark on this journey of commitment to a topic. Now, Yuki and I were class fellows, and she has already mentioned the film that I want to begin talking about, because the first time that I made a professional film was this film. And when my co-directors and I sort of came back and told all our friends that this is the topic we're working on, the only thing we heard was, "Ye kya topic hai?" And that was something that we heard so often that at some point in time we were quite amazed that uh, certain things are so taboo that even cinema does not want to pick them up. And it has taken so many years, and it's only last year that we had an Oscar recognition for, you know, issues related to the menstrual cycle and the way women are taught shame and guilt and so many other things. And I'm really talking of a time when in 2006, uh, we were talking about this idea of what are our bodies like? How do we determine what is the difference between us and those around us? And without getting into, the nuances of gender, which also matter so much, at the level of sex, it's your periods because you know that your breasts are developing, you look different from, what is a quote unquote masculine body. And that is how, we started with the idea of making the film Blood on My Hands. That year, there was a call for films, and we participated. And the focus was on reproductive rights and sexual health. And we said, okay, let's go back to the very beginning, periods. And I will not name names, but a lot of people that she and I, that is Yuki and I, knew at that point in time said, what's the big deal? Ek bari hota, I'm sure you get used to it. And why should we talk about it? And so we had a lot of questions about how do we show something which is usually hidden. And yes, of course, nobody wants to see blood, but we want to talk about the blood that is on our hands, literally and figuratively. And it took us on a very interesting journey. One of the most important lessons that I learned uh, was that I should stick by whatever my instinct is, that this topic was important, particularly because people kept telling us, ये क्या topic है, इस पे बनाना ज़रूरी है, तुम्हें कुछ और नहीं मिला. That confirmed for us that we were onto something. But beyond the confirmation, we also had to be very sure that we did not resort to any form of othering. It's very easy to say that concepts such as shame, such as forcing women to drink cow's urine, locking them up when they have their periods, happened somewhere in the past, or not in my city, or not in my home, not in my community. But all of these are little gray sort of lies that we tell ourselves so that we can be functional. And our idea then became to look at the urban space only. We looked at simple things like television advertising. A lot of the time, people spoke about hiding it, about being able to wear white. And we also realized that most people would sort of change the channel or get up and leave if it came while they were watching it with their parents. And these were the kind of things we started tapping into to create the psychology of people who are either taught shame or are guilted into having what is a simple bodily phenomenon. And Yuki did talk about the sneeze. We began with the sneeze because if you can sneeze and say, I sneezed, why can't you have your period and say, I'm bleeding? It's as normal as sweating, it's as normal as any biological function. And so the reason that I'm going into such great detail about this is because this was the first time that I not only encountered this kind of dismissal of what I wanted to do creatively, it also taught me that the ordinary and something which we sort of tend to sort of ignore because there are other things which are so exciting, such as romance and grand tragedies and beautiful faces and amazing bodies. These little things get lost, and those are the things that I got very excited about discovering and working with. And so today I just want to take you through a lot of these examples, which I think are so easily accessible and very important to be shared and spoken about. So if any one of you want to see this film, Blood on My Hands is the title, as you can see on screen. You can go to the Public Service Broadcasting Trust, the PSBT YouTube channel, and you can see the film. And, you can always write to me or leave comments there about what you think about it. Uh, when this film was initially screened, we were very green. We didn't know how to send a film to festivals. We were not very sure if people wanted to show a film about periods. But I came to know much later that this film was actually being shown in kind of like an underground circuit. There were people who would come for these special screenings, and there would be these set of films which were not being screened elsewhere, but would be screened in these by invitation only spaces. And this was happening in India. So I didn't know we had such a cool subculture. But a friend of mine called up and he said, "You've made this film," and I saw it, and he said, "I'm keeping a copy so that if I ever have a daughter, this is the film I'm going to watch with her." And today he has a daughter, and he keeps telling me that when it's time, we're watching that film together. And to me now, that is the kind of impact that may not have been measured in a social survey. It may not have come in a news magazine, but it's a very important confirmation to me that this kind of journey is important and relevant. And of course, we've seen till date, there is a huge amount of effort and work which needs to go into women having the right over their bodies, over sanitation, and also choosing what form of menstrual hygiene they want. UNICEF has spent scores of money. The government of India has finally come about and reduced the luxury tax on sanitary napkins. Simple things which are considered womanly problems are so much more. And so I feel that nothing is ordinary. And in this current time, we are going through this huge crisis of, is my work relevant? Or how will my work be relevant? If you're in business, for example, a manufacturer or somebody who produces goods, obviously you will have questions about scale and factories. But those of us who are in the creative economy, whether we are craftspersons, whether we are filmmakers, whether we are artisans, whether we are tailors, the question before us today is, am I truly relevant? Are all my skills going to be important in the coming days? How will they be important? And why will they be important? And I have had so many conversations, not just with older, very established filmmakers, some even national award winners, but even with younger filmmakers, younger artists, photographers, journalists who keep saying, is my work relevant? Should I have studied medicine? Would I not have been more productive right now? Should I have done something else? What can I do with my skills? I just write and make images, and everybody is doing that. And that is why I think that today it becomes very, very important for us to recast ourselves as essential workers and to not overinflate our importance. It's not to say that the world will starve if there is no art, but the fact is that if there is art, then we can have more conversations about why people are starving, and why some people continue to starve even though there seems to be plenty in the world. And it's only art that allows you to have these kind of conversations. And of course, when I say art, I don't need to speak of only the esoteric or abstract. I'm even talking about the simple art of message design. How do you tell a pregnant mother in a tier two city that she must eat rather than just serve the family that she is betrothed to? These are behavioral communication change cues. These are important cues. And I think those are the aspects which can be developed and sort of worked with. And so I would say that if you are somebody who is aspiring to work in this discipline, especially in terms of communication, you should not be shy of sitting down with a journal and writing down what are the essential impacts that work done in this area has had for you as an individual. I know, for example, I live in a polio free world, and everybody around me who belong to other countries who usually tend to look down upon India uh, are quite gobsmacked that we managed to achieve that. We are a country which is talking far more openly about women's bodies and bodies of young men than many others in the world. Those are very interesting aspects for me, both as a filmmaker, as a teacher, as well as just a human being. It's so much easier to be able to talk about how to make a set comfortable, for example. And I think that we're also essential workers because we are looking at portraiture of people, or we're looking at serving communities, which will always be forgotten. Today, we're talking about migrant workers because they make for very stark images. But when we go back to the normal, whatever you call it, however you define it, we will go back to ignoring them because they will be the invisible hands trying to make things work for us. That is where, somebody who is focused on listening carefully to all these everyday, ordinary, invisible people will have very, very critical work to do. We cannot let people forget. We cannot let people erase. And so, if you're writing that journal, if you're really doing this exercise, I would also put down things which you feel are going to be productive in terms of your contribution. If you really want to make a difference, you must write down which arts you enjoy and why. Write down how it has impacted you personally, people, artists, teachers, and then see how you can carry this forward and whom you would like to impact. And you will find that it will be full of examples of the everyday or the ordinary. She said that to me, or I read this somewhere, or I had these two aunties who were constantly bickering about somebody not being married. Those are the kinds of things which can inspire so many things. And that is why, I say that while there is a method, there is also a madness to this. You have to be mad to be able to listen to the sounds of the birds, of these whispers of people who we cannot see, and to really pay attention to them. So in this madness is also a lot of, methodological rigor. Did I scare somebody? Did somebody say something? Maybe
Please
somebody.
mute your channels. I think somebody by mistake have unmuted. I request everyone to mute your channels.
That's okay. So the this slide, I call it methods and madness because I admit to being a bit crazy and I say it very happily. And that's because I want to be able to, reach out and tell people that, this great conversation that I had with my taxi driver, it was a sociology of the country. And it's true. I have them so many times. So why is it difficult for me to sort of put together a small series of, taxiwalas talking? And there are people who picked up these ideas. Why are they important? They're important because they're telling us inputs and things which other people will not be able to. And, after I made Blood on My Hands, I made another film called The Great Indian Jugaad. And I made this film because a friend came to me and said, can you help me make a PowerPoint presentation? I want to present to a school in Europe, and I want to say that India survives because of Jugaad. And we got into this long conversation about what is Jugaad? Are you a Jugadu? Am I a Jugadu? What does it mean? Is it a bad word? Like if somebody says, ye to Jugaad se kaam karte hain, does that mean I'm always taking shortcuts? And I just started thinking of whether or not it is a truly, truly Indian way of surviving. It made me think like, why not? If this person can pull a rabbit out of a hat, why not? Why can't I go and find out a little bit more? And, we all know that it's also a vehicle. There are over 80,000 jugars just in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So imagine across north of India how many of them there will be. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially the chassis of a Jeep, a water pump, the Kirloskar water pump, tractors, tires, and a canopy, literally sort of put together. And the first time that a jugaad was in an accident, uh, people found out that the guy who had written the FIR, he had essentially said that it's a jugaad because it's an assembly of so many parts. And that I think became something that really inspired me because I was able to put together like this cross section of voices from so many parts of the country. I traveled on highways, I traveled on tractors, I was also offered a ride on a bullock cart. I spoke to so many kinds of people, and everybody had a definition. And people's opinion, people as experts, was truly fascinating. And later on, of course, this film did win me my first award, and it sort of gave me a little bit of recognition. But it wasn't all very easy because I remember that I had sent this film and I had got 17 rejections. Okay. It's very important for me that when I talk about something that works, I should also be honest about, the struggle that went behind it. I got 17 rejections. It was rather discouraging because I had put in my own money to make this film. And of course, the concept of Jugaad was common to everybody. Again, everybody said, ye kya topic hai? And I kept thinking that no, it's so interesting because I met people who had invented scooters that could run on water. People had invented bikes that could run on sunlight. There was so much that India was doing. And India, which is not about what you and I see, but an India which is living, surviving, fighting. Even if it's reinventing the wheel, it's so ingenious. And so I sent it to this festival in Germany and I said, all right, maybe, you know, this madness will be rewarded, maybe it won't be. And I had sort of begun to give up hope and I said, maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe the topics I'm choosing are not right. And I got a call from customs at the Hajj terminal in New Delhi. And the guy said, have you sent a tape to Germany? And I said, yes. So he said, but it's not gone. It's with us. And I was shocked because I said, okay, how will I enter the competition now? And why do you have my tape? So he said, you have to come to the terminal because I think it's been confiscated as part of a drug racket. I was completely shocked because I didn't know how to sort of respond to this. And I was so desperate to get my film sent. And they had given me a special window of just 2.5 days. And they had told me that if you come, we can give you accommodation to stay, but you can't really sort of be given flight tickets. So somehow with my savings, I put the money together. And then when I went to the Hajj terminal, I realized I was in the best of company. They had tapes from BBC, they had tapes from Z News, they had tapes from, I also think, Star Sports at that time, and there was my tape. And so we sat down. I'd gone with my father, and the gentleman across said, "What have you made the film of?" As a social, be concerned about moral goods. And I remember I had just finished reading the Cinematograph Act for a class that I was giving a lecture in, and I sort of pounced on him and I said that you have no right to control it. It can travel anywhere. I only need a censor certificate to show it in India. And then, it was the patriarch versus me because, I was this young girl. And so at some point in time, my father put his hand on my shoulder and pushed me back and told the guy, look, it's like an essay writing competition. She sends it. If she wins, she wins. If she doesn't, she doesn't. Uh, and then my father asked him, आपको topic. That changed his attitude towards me. So I know for sure that a lot of and 2.5 days later, we were the first Indian film to win at that festival. So it's also a question of sort of pushing yourself and standing by what you say and what you do. And once again, it was at another point of time in my life where I heard the same line, "ये क्या topic है?" Right? This time with a little more kindness, not as much derision as I had heard when I had created Blood on My Hands with my two co-directors. So I would say that with your madness, which is wanting to listen to things and trying to do things which are in the ordinary, you must have a method. And part of that method is to be tenacious, to be able to do a lot of research. And at that point in time, I had worked with a young student. She was just in college at that point in time, and I had trained her in a few workshops, and we got talking, and she said she'd like to assist me. So we worked on the film together, and she really enjoyed the fact that we had to research, and a person would say, "I know so and so, you can call them," and then we would build up the trail. It's like treasure hunting. Whether you're creating documentaries or features, or whether it's journalism, it's about treasure hunting. You hear people, you follow things, and she liked the fact that you had to riddle and find clues, talk to people. Sometimes doors are shut, sometimes they are opened, and then she decided to take up journalism, and she went to the Asian College of Journalism in Chennai. And a few years later, I got this article in my email, and that's the second piece that I want to talk to you about. Uh, it's about a woman in 1996. It's a portrait of a woman in a bandhani sari, and Saudamini Jain, who is the journalist who wrote this piece, had gone to the Columbia School of Journalism after she had studied at ACJ. And she was walking the gallery, and this was a series of portraits by an American portrait maker. Her name was Alice Neal, Neel, Alice Neal. And Neal was known for her portraiture of people who were downtrodden, people who were usually not represented by portrait artists, because there was a time when only kings and queens and the famous could get portraits made. It's a different matter now that you can have emoji stickers and transform yourself. But that was not the case back then. And because Neil was known for focusing on people who are not represented in mainstream portraiture, so Damini thought she'd go and sort of look at the gallery. And in the gallery, she saw this one portrait of a woman, like I said, in a bandhani sari, who had a beautiful long braid, but had no name. The name of the portrait was Woman 1996. And that became her first commissioned piece, which she wrote for Scroll, because she decided to find out who is this woman. And when she did that, she was able to write a very beautiful piece, which is about how immigrants might be portrayed in Trump's time. So she was able to correlate a point in history, which is a young artist who paints an anonymous Indian woman and highlights the fact that they were immigrants even back then. And we're talking, now of at least the early 1900s, right? So there is somebody who's there, who's a young woman, who's Indian, who's traveled the ocean and is obviously gone there to study. And then archivists told her that this woman had gone to Columbia maybe to study, and that she was the daughter of a very famous Bengali writer. And so with that, Sodamini discovered that there was this Bengali writer that nobody speaks about. And his name is Bhabani Bhattacharya. And he was one of the most widely read Indian authors in America. And when we talk about whether we get our sense of taste and literature from the West, we must also know of our history and how our civilization has sort of given back to their sense of aesthetics and their taste as well. So Ujjaini Bhattacharya, who was featured in that piece, was his daughter. And then, in the piece, we sort of travel, and so Daming talks about how she traces her, how she gets to talk to her, and sort of connects the dot in this little history. And why it's such a special piece is because she's demonstrating this madness. You look at a portrait in a gallery and you say, I'm going to find out who this woman is. Who does that? But clearly people do that. And why they do that becomes very, very interesting. And then how you sort of, piece things together. And to me, you can read this on Scroll. If you just were to write Sodamini Jain, Woman 1996, Ujjaini Bhattacharya, you would be taken to that piece. It's a very interesting read. It's not very long, but it's a very nice way of looking at how a single person, an anonymous image, can give you a huge sense of the history of immigration, the idea that brain drain could also involve women, the fact that women traveled overseas back then and trying to make a life for themselves, and how an American woman notices an Indian woman and gives her a place in time in history. All of these are such beautiful stories of creation, of creativity, of serendipity. And anybody else listening to this could make yet another film about this journalist who discovers this person. There are so many layers that sort of unpack. So I would always say that wherever you are, no matter what you are doing, being inspired by the ordinary or by the everyday can be very exciting. And most often than not, when people say, "Ye kya topic hai?" It is likely that you are on to something, as I said earlier too. But it's a question of how you then sort of bring in the kind of rigor and research that somebody like Sodamini may have done. And, these are all ideas. These are all sort of concepts with which we can approach our work, talk about our work. But today, an artist is not in isolation, right? I do not command the room. I am one of many people who is creative. That is a fact. I am one of many people who may have professionally learned some skills to be creative. That is the only thing that qualifies me to be an artist at one level. Because everybody has cameras, everybody has a sensibility that can be aesthetically improved. And today we live in an era of public performance. It's very easy for me to find people, to find behaviors, to understand and imitate, to read up, to look at aesthetics. And this is all because of technology. So, this is the second point at which I think there is a lot of crisis among professional creators. What do we create? How do we create it? How can we be relevant in an era of selfies? I just told you about this professional portrait artist whose work was in this fancy gallery. Now, in an era of selfies, when people selfies themselves make it to the gallery, what will that artist do? How will they survive? Then you have Insta stories, you have TikTok, you have a variety of layers and layers and layers of reality through which you can create yourself. And I have found that in my practice, it's been very liberating actually to no longer be what is known as an auteur. It's a French term, auteur, and it sort of dates back to very, traditional kind of ideas of film, which is fiction based. But it also talks of this notion that the filmmaker is the person that is observing things. It is their, signature. They are the author of the film. And so we all make very individualistic, quirky work. It's so nice, no, for the artist's ego. It's so nice for the artist publicist to say, oh, this filmmaker does this kind of films, or this kind of communication agency specializes in reaching this kind of audience, or this person can do this perfect logo design or write this kind of article. We are all very happy to hide behind one big label, but now that is sort of dissolving, disappearing. Everybody has different labels. My label can be taken by you tomorrow. um, so I found that it's very easy for me to now not be an auteur and not say that I am the person with the definitive vision, to say that I'm a creator, but who is now shifting and becoming a co creator or a curator. And this was not easy for me to do. This emerged for me when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, where I was trying to understand what is my position as an artist who's trying to work with technologies that completely disable my power, right? So if you have a phone and I tell you, why don't you take a shot in this fashion, and you decided to take it like that, I can't do much because maybe this is more interesting. Maybe if I could be upside down, it would be even more interesting. there are these moments of surprise, moments of discovery, and moments of frustration that come with realizing that different people can now manage the camera, can now edit things, and introduce a variety of narrative elements into what is going on. And I didn't surrender. I kind of shook hands with it. I said, okay, welcome to the table. Let me try and understand who and what you're about. And this is so important, particularly if you're trying to look at communities for, say, any kind of behavioral or social change, because those communities can now push back with their own media justifying their older behavior, or they can push back with their own criticism of the media, which you never heard earlier. It's 360, 720, it's crazy. Because, we also have extended reality, there's augmented reality, there's virtual reality. We're surrounded in every possible dimension with feedback, with stimulus, and so it becomes easier for us to say, okay, I am a person, a piece in the puzzle. And with co-creation, what I have now started doing is, even before technology was a factor, I would always sit with the people that I was working with, and I would explain to them why I'm placing my camera so close to them, why it is away, why I feel like, they could change their clothes, why we must talk about something. I've also had moments when I've had people cry in front of the camera, and I have on the edit table cut it out and had producers tell me, put it back in. It's going to get you eyeballs. It's so exciting. वो रो रहा है. आदमी रोते हुए बहुत कम दिखते हैं. Camera रखो. And then me saying no, because it's not a question of a man crying or a woman crying. It's a question of a human being who is now extremely vulnerable and breaking down. Do I have the right to sort of expose their vulnerability to the world? And in those conditions I have decided that no, it is not. But then there are many people who are now putting up confessional videos, who are crying, who are showing scars, who are talking about abuse, and I have to accommodate those narratives with my ideas of how a person can be portrayed or not. And it allows me to understand that there are certain things I can't do, but my co-creators can do. And so my subjects are now people who actively use technology with me. Sometimes I teach them, sometimes I don't teach them. And it's risky because, with training in film and professional training in film, you get very used to deciding, this is my frame, this is my signature style. I would like somebody to look like this, or I want them to be like that. But with time, you realize that these things have to be forgotten. New ways have to be learned. You need to brainstorm better. I was teaching these youth leaders as part of a UNDP workshop on how to use mobile phones to document their lives. And we were talking about the difference between documentation and documentary, why both are important, why should young leaders who are trying to save the world actually pick up the camera and document what they're doing. My simple answer to them was, because you have to leave something to the next generation. But at the same time, it also taught them that once you start documenting, people start saying things to you which you haven't heard before, or people start performing for you, and you realize that they're probably not as comfortable as you thought they were. And so, as part of this workshop, which was happening in Himachal, we went to this village and we sort of said, okay, there's some intervention work which is being done to prevent landslides during earthquakes. Can we document it? And this old woman came to me and said, I don't want to talk. I just want to sing. And I looked at all the other youth leaders and I said, would you want documentation with women singing about it? And first they looked at me a little shocked because everything has to be black and white. How can you be in song? And then I said, maybe we can give them an opportunity, let them try. And all these old women came out and they sang these beautiful songs that they had composed about protecting the environment, about preventing earthquakes. And now a lot of them have used these songs, repackaged them, and started sort of teaching them to young school children. So you realize that, again, something which sort of causes a little consternation can really go a long way. And so now these women are not my subjects. They are not the object of my inquiry. They are my co creators. They have equal say in how to do it, what to say, what to sing, what not to sing. Or, like one of them just said, now we're hungry and nobody will sing. And that's it. We could not shoot beyond the 2 hours that we had shot that day. And it's not easy to do it in the hills because the sun sets and it gets dark early. But you sort of learn to respect that reality is beyond your frames. And this is not my set where I say, no, the crew will work till the sun sets. So these are kind of cues that you work with and build. And I've also started now working on the kind of curation that I do, where when people send in clips and material to me based on themes that we have agreed upon, I come up with creative ways to present that. And choosing the platform, choosing the technology has become a very, very significant aspect of, my performance as an artist. And if you find that too difficult to believe, I'd like you to look up this very interesting story. It exists only in HT archives because we all know that Snapchat stories are only for a fixed timeline of 24 hours. It's about rape survivors. This story came out in 2016. And when you start looking at the story, you'll see this young woman whose face is actually now that of a fire breathing dragon. And she's talking about how she was abused by a relative. And at one level, you think, okay, maybe this is gimmicky. But at another level, you start realizing that technology has allowed this young person to wear a filter and to express her anger while also talking about what has happened to her. So rather than using the old techniques of blanking her face or changing her voice, we are giving her a new persona and a new avatar. And that is what new technology is able to do. It allows us to push our dimensionality. And I thought this experiment was really very interesting because it allowed these women to talk about their stories in their own voices. It didn't need me, it didn't need a facilitator, it didn't need somebody talking down at them, telling them what they can or cannot say. They could just use the filters of their choice, transform themselves into whatever format they liked, and to express their criticism of the world and the lack of support that they got. And these testimonies, again, are so important. Rape survivors wearing Snapchat filters. क्या टॉपिक है ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है ये because it allows you to sort of empower people, and it recognizes the fact that a lot of these technologies are being used even by communities, even though they may not have the best electricity supply, the best handset available, or the best internet connections. People want to express themselves, and these are opportunities for us to choose and curate opportunities for these people, not just for ourselves. And of course, working with technology has also meant that every day there is a glitch. If I have made 10 films, I have lost 20 because my hard disk has crashed or something has been corrupted. There was a time when people said that, the digital is going to be more permanent. We will be able to keep a record of things that are lost. For example, voices of people who are the last speakers of a particular language, or voices of singers who are no more, or images of people whose art is enduring. But it's so easy to delete a file and to sort of completely lose sight of what is, um, you know, bytes and gigabytes and megabytes and pixels. They just disappear. Sometimes there is corruption of material as well. So then what do you do with that? Because that is your own material. That is all that you have to work with. And that is where I think I would really encourage you to look at this piece, this little essay. It's by Arif Al Nomeh. He belongs to Yemen. And he has this very, very interesting photo essay. He had a power cut, his computer malfunctioned, and the scanner chip with which he was trying to transfer his photographs from his laptop and his camera onto the cloud got corrupted. And all his images were distorted. I mean, he used that to talk about the idea of memory and community memory, and asks important questions like, can artists really hold on to a memory and preserve a memory? Because whose perspective is being shown? What subjectivity are we talking about? Who gave the artists the right to say that this is how a community should be represented? All of these questions come through in bizarre lines, distortions, smudges of gray, cyan, and so many others. And there is an essay by Hito Stirl. It's called In Defense of the Poor Image, in which she says that, we got so used to, we got so spoiled by this idea of high definition, that we only wanted to look at and converse about film, art, representation, portraiture if it was beautiful. And we stopped looking at the poor image, images that are made by people with low cost technology, not with your 20 megapixel camera, but a 2 megapixel camera, something which is small, so tiny, but is an important reality. And of course, we have video volunteers as a stark example of how images sent by citizen volunteers can become important and compelling news. There's Khabar Lahariya. There are so many kinds of these examples which are in your universe, which can be seen from this lens of poor image, poor sound, poor fidelity, but not poor, highly, highly rich. It's just a question of how we look at it, and how glitch art, how grain, how noise, how things which, people say, that's not pretty, are so pretty. are so beautiful and can be so important to express things around us. So if you can look at Arif's work, I would really encourage you to do that. Those images are quite exciting. They are bursts of colors. They are sometimes confusing, but when you put them in context and you realize that this artist is demonstrating that memory cannot always be accessed, memory can be lost. We realize that if we have fragments, we can work with fragments as well. And that to me is how the artist can reinvent or innovate how they can be in a particular place. When I was sort of coming to terms with the idea of co creation, I also decided to work with three very unique sets of people. If you still can see the screen before you, I worked with domestic workers, homemakers, and hackers. So, three very, very unique individuals or individual groups, you might add. Ashia is actually an interactive mobile app that I have created. And trust me, from being a filmmaker and moving on to somebody who's behind the creation of an app, I must have cried buckets of tears because it really taught me that I had to unlearn so many things. As a filmmaker, or even as somebody who does message design for communication change, you will always be asked to think of an audience. You will probably think of some basic behaviors like can they afford a cinema ticket or not? What age group am I looking at? What language do they speak of? What are their general behaviors? If you're getting into like one-on-one communication, you may even look at what is the local cultural attitude towards something. But when you start devising a mobile app, you really need to get into absolute details like how big is the screen size? Can you have six icons? If the person's screen set shrinks, you can no longer see six icons. Should you have six icons? Is the person literate? Is their finger big? Is their finger small? Does their finger shake? Are they literate? Do they know what they see? Can you have text? These are such simple things that we take for granted. But this is where, as a person who is trying to communicate and to work with the everyday, I've realized that elements of design have become so important for me. And I don't mean to be the expert in it at all, but the experience of the user as they interact with my work became so very important. Created Ashia after Jyoti Singh Pandey's, gang rape and murder. In 2016, when I saw domestic workers and homemakers take to the streets of Delhi, I was very struck by the fact that this was for the first time, truly, at least in my consciousness, that I had seen both homemakers and domestic workers step out together from a personal space into a public space and to assert that they belong to the city. And for the longest time, I had been thinking that, why are we not talking about urban poor? Why are we not talking about women in the city? Because they are the invisible hands that power the city. Your mothers who are homemakers, the domestic workers that come to your homes. These women literally create space for us to be able to work, to have leisure, to have pleasure, to be mobile. And yet we never talk about their experiences. And so I decided with my own savings to give them mobile phones. I gave them mobile phones with cameras and torches. Torches because I know a lot of them, traverse spaces which have very poor lighting or places which have no electricity. And I essentially asked them, I want to show the world what the women of Delhi experience and what their idea of mobility is. Because I was sick of being called a resident of the rape capital of the world. And yes, I'm not saying Delhi is an easy space to negotiate. In fact, as a woman and as a young person, now as an older woman, I have faced a lot of struggles because of my gender and my sex being in this city. It's been challenging. But I've also found the most amazing allies. I've also found my voice, I found my profession. And it is the everyday, right? On an everyday basis, people would tell me, why don't you leave the city? Why don't you move to another country? And I kept thinking to myself, how many of us should leave? Where should we go? Why should we go? And are we truly in the rape capital, or are we in a space which is threatening to women, needs reform, but it is their Ashia? It's not a rape capital. I don't live in a rape capital. I live in a city which is trying to improve itself, and women are working so hard every day. They are fighting to be out and about. So if I keep telling them that you live in a space which is just about rape, I deny all their agency. I don't give them space to say, I want to be out. I need to be out. I'm brave enough. I can deal with this, or I need help. Because if you say, oh, you live in a bad space, then automatically no good can come to me, right? Because It's all bad. So how do I break this binary? And I completely felt like I had to choose what was around me. I had to choose what was invisible and make it visible. And that's why domestic workers and homemakers. And in this whole idea of trying to be very, very democratic and a good co-creator, I taught them how to use the delete button when I taught them how to use the camera. And oh my God, every time they filmed, instead of pressing save, they would press delete. And then when I would go visit them, we would look at the screen and it would be empty, and they would very animatedly tell me, I filmed this, I filmed that, and then I pressed this. And I had to really come to this idea of the accidental learning model, and to say that I can encourage people to be creative, but I can't impose my creativity, my timeline onto them. And that it also changed why and how the project would look. And that's why I had to work with hackers, because there was nobody who was going to sponsor this. There was no company that was going to make an app which only domestic workers and homemakers would use, with very low literacy, very basic. And so, hackers in the city of Boston, where I was on a Fulbright fellowship, heard about my project, and I would go with my laptop and literally sort of pitch. I would, like, every Tuesday when hackers would meet, I would say, hi, I'm from India, these are the women I'm trying to work with. And I had subtitled a few things, and I would say, can any one of you please help me make this into a mobile app, because the people who have made this for, especially domestic workers, do not have more than 10 minutes in a day to actually interact with anything which is entertainment based or which is not related to work, and they will probably forego their cup of tea to be able to interact with this app. So they cannot come to a cinema hall. I will not make another festival film in spaces where they will not come or will be uncomfortable to come in. I will not make this on DVDs and CD players that they will never be able to see. And I will not put it on pen drives because they do not have computers. But they do have handsets, simple, basic handsets, which they can use. And so the idea was essentially to be able to look at how being a co-creator with technology that my co-creators had, and then asking others who are familiar with it to create a reality and present a reality that I'm interested in. And so this app is available on Google Play for testing and for other sources. And it allows me to talk about the city that I live in as an Ashiyan, but not as this upwardly mobile woman who's talking on behalf of everybody, but just as Anandana, who goes to these people's homes, who gets scolded if she's late, who gets scolded if she's not explained things properly, and who sometimes is asked, is my frame nice? And that in itself is a very refreshing space for a filmmaker to be. uh, and I think that that project taught me how to respond even during the time of this crisis, which is the pandemic. I realized that there were so many infodemics. People were constantly sharing videos which were not necessarily with standardized material or standardized knowledge. And I was very confident that I had now developed the capacity to work with many people. I had even worked out the ethics and the processes of sharing credit, sharing procedures, sharing ownership. And so um, with my team and volunteers. By team, I mean my colleagues. I have a label, it's called Cinemad India. We have a YouTube channel, it's also called Cinemad India. If you were to go on that channel, you would find that there are over 151 videos animated in 23 languages that focus on behaviors related to positive behaviors around this current crisis. There are 7 videos per language, and we created these videos based on behaviors that we see around ourselves. I noticed that where I live, women would go for walks in groups. Men would still schedule appointments for haircuts with barbers. People would catch up with friends at the end of a day, even while in lockdown. And these were the behaviors that we needed to change. And I decided that the language could not be just English and Hindi, which is official, didactic, sensationalist, but it would be in a language that is of the language of the heart, which people can share with their children. And therefore, the form that it took is what it is. So if you have the time, please do that channel. Please try and share the playlists if you can, because this was created free of cost, Creative Commons, for anybody to use, NGOs, teachers, community radio, whoever wants to use it, however they want to use it, just to be able to reinforce that, we need to follow some behaviors, simple behaviors. And it's as simple as explaining it to a kid, but it's as difficult as explaining it to a kid. Because just as children will listen to you and do exactly what they want, you too will do exactly what you want. So how does one appeal to you? How does one talk to you? And how does one keep it simple? And in that, I had to, really work through a lot of very interesting moments, because a lot of artists are in lockdown and are struggling. And the first few times that, we wrote out the copy and we sent it to few associates and said, do you want to sort of tweak it a little for us? Do you want to contribute to this? People came up with things like Corona Kamina, or this dastardly time that I am in. And I just realized that people are probably bottling up so much, and so we removed all of these kinds of negative terms, any sensationalism, any attempt at intimidation in the materials that we made. And it worked. I think my most favorite endorsement was from a friend's 5-year-old daughter. I had named one of the playlists after her, and I'd sent it to her and said, please let me know what you think. And she had sent me a message saying, thank you for making the video, because that video reminded me of my father. My father was traveling and he came home, and I was not allowed to hug him for 14 days. And after 14 days, I could hug him. And, he had a big beard, just like the character that you have made. And so this is what I am feeling. Thank you for making my life. And that's really deep and really, I think, fruitful coming from a young child. But that is the kind of impact I could make only and only because I co-created and curated inputs by artists. I think one of my most favorite stories of contribution is that my mother, Nepalese cook, she heard me sort of working on these videos one day. She often comes in once in a while to borrow things or to lend things. And she said, "What is this?" And I said, "I'm working on these videos." And then she said, "I'm educated. I studied till class, and I can write Hindi, and I know Nepali, and can I contribute?" And I said, "Yes, you must, because this is not a time or a practice where I decide somebody can or cannot do something." I explained to her that it cannot be negative and why we're making it. And she went home, and she and her family over 4 days translated it, checked it with each other, wrote out parts, recorded it, and also shared the videos. And to me, that is truly empowering people. That is community media facilitated through individuals. That is the power of the media. And of course, she was also asked by her family members, "ये क्या topic है? कोरोना पे क्यों बना रही हो? तुम्हें तो नहीं हो गया?" And my brave cook said, "मैं इसलिए बना रही हूँ because यही topic सबसे important." And that, I think, is the kind of endorsement you would want from the communities you work for or the people you want to work with. So I would essentially sort of leave you with a little manifesto that if you want to stand up for what you're doing, or if you want to really push forth and talk of things which matter, uh, make the invisible visible. And that doesn't mean you sort of become Sherlock Holmes or need a microscope or a telescope and need to go very far and beyond. You just need to be, and you need to listen. You need to look at an element that surprised you. That is what is going to make your art original, because everything has been made before, and everything is being made while you're making it. Jugaad taught me that if I am painting, so are you, so is somebody in Italy, so is somebody in Antarctica. The fact of the matter is, your moment of surprise, your moment of engagement, your moment of humanity is very unique. And that is what you have to sort of stand by and push for. And my second mantra is speaking with. Stop trying to speak for people. You are not there to empower people. That is a myth. You are there to enable people. If you recognize that, the way you talk to them, the way you design for them, the way you create for them will completely change. It will also make you far more open to using technologies which challenge your authority or challenge the way your work will be used or responded to. And of course, there is online abusing, there is troll. People may deliberately go and put, thumbs down when you're sort of desperately hoping for a thumbs up. All of that will happen. But you know what? That is the point of surrender, because you are speaking with, you're not speaking for, you are not a pravakta, you're a karyakarta. There is a difference between these two, and it's a beautiful, important, intelligent choice to make. And of course, notes. I'm a huge fan for putting down ideas, putting them around myself, and not sort of sticking only to a journal. If it's out there, if it's visual, it inspires you in ways that are very, very interesting. And I would say that that is the madness in the method. You may have a whole wall which is colorful, you may have a few books which are colorful, but a little bit of color, a little bit of madness, always going beyond the screen and always spilling over is what is important. So I'd like to sort of end my monologue by saying that if you want to pursue writing, teaching, academics, anything that is creative, and I fundamentally believe everything is, surprise is what surprised you. You can only surprise somebody if you're listening carefully, if you're listening sensitively, and yeah, if you had a good lunch. So I'm hoping you've all listened well to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananda. It was very, very interesting. And the way you explained everything, starting from your first film till Corona times, it is really engaging. I'm sure they must have learned that how in the world when everybody can create things and technology is not a big thing. Everybody knows how to use the technology. Everybody has a sense and aesthetics and how they are using and co-creating things. I think it's amazingly combined together. So now I open the forum to all the students. If you have any questions, you may ask, you may type in the chat section.
Otherwise, your teachers will be forced to ask questions.
I'm sure they themselves have so many questions.
Ma'am, I have a question here.
Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
hi.
Tell me your name and go ahead.
Jagrati this side.
Yeah,
Hi,
hi
Jagriti.
Jagriti. Please go ahead.
Hi. Ma'am, we were talking about working with the domestic helpers and the people around where we counter with people in the day-to-day conversations that we have. So the part is we get to know the stories about people in conversations because it's a normal daily talk. But when you put a camera for there, the people stop talking to you or they start manipulating the facts that you wish to portray in your stories, or they say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to come to the world. I'm not okay with it. और मुझे अपनी families के secret नहीं reveal करने. So how do you manage with those factors when they appear to you?
Right. So I think that's a very good question, Jagriti. I do believe that, people perform for the camera. Sometimes they create fiction, which is, they tell you what they think you want to hear because they want to please you. They like the fact that the camera is on them and you're giving. Uh, on another hand, there will be people who, like you said, will feel very reticent, feel very afraid, and feel like their privacy is being violated. And that is why I believe that you should always spend more time talking to your subjects and explaining to them the consequences of what you're trying to do, right? I think that a lot of the times when I travel to the villages, for example, my last film called Ai Gai, it's set in Bihar, and I had to travel to places where there is no electricity for hours at an end, and there are kids who can only dream of ever buying clothes which are not even torn. And I remember there was a young woman. Um, I would call her a young woman because she was shouldering so many responsibilities. She was 16 only, and she was sort of, working very hard, and she wanted to study but she couldn't go anywhere, and she agreed to talk to me about how lack of electricity impacts childhood, right? And after she finished speaking to me, after 2 hours, I'd left my phone number with her. I would leave my phone number with everybody that I interviewed in the village, and I said, if you ever change your mind, if you ever feel uncomfortable, you call me immediately and I will come back and delete the footage in front of you, or I will come back and explain things to you. And so she called me and she said, you know what? I have a brother in law and he's calling me, a promiscuous girl. He's saying that I've brought shame to the family because I spoke to a camera, and I'm afraid he's going to beat me up. And I don't know what to do. And she said, I believe in what you're saying. I wanted to talk about what I'm going through, but now I'm afraid. So I remember I canceled my shoot for the next day. It was an expensive decision. We went all the way back. I hunted for the sarpanch of the village. I explained everything to him. I showed him the footage. We went back to their house. That man would not speak to me. He would say that ऐसी औरतें खराब औरतें होती हैं. And I was a woman commanding uh, a largely male unit, and I had to sort of stand my ground. And finally, we sort of got through to him. We spoke to him. We got the sarpanch to ensure that the girls would not be harassed by him, and that was the kind of extra responsibility that I took. And there will be cases where you will speak to people, and this has happened to me earlier. You turn up and then they say, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I've changed my mind. And you know what? You have to respect that. You have to, as a filmmaker or as a journalist, probably then talk about the fact that There is denial or refusal. And refusal does not mean that the story has ended. The refusal could be the beginning of the story. The refusal could be the story. And I'll go back to my first film. Our film actually begins with a series of people. Like today, you have everybody in Zoom chats and Cisco chats, little boxes. So we have a series of people saying, I can't talk about this topic. ये क्या topic है? इसमें जो शर्म आती है. My parents have said बात नहीं करना. No, 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 no. That's our opening. And it's a lovely opening because I don't have to say people are not talking about it. I don't have to say, oh, she's silent. Silence can be beautiful. And so when you are creating something, when you are writing something, see if you can play with silences also. See if you can play with refusals also. That's creative treatment of actuality. And before that, when you talk to people, always demystify. For the project that is Ashia, I showed women, videos of people trolling and abusing women. I told them that this will travel. I told them we will not have control. Then they decided they would still be part of the project. So you have to take them into confidence. And if you don't know something, if you can't guarantee something, don't do that. And it's not easy when you have a deadline, when you have a press card, when you have a salary. But at the end of the day, if you say that मैंने काम ऐसे ही करना है, by the fifth, sixth time, people will say ये काम ऐसे ही करती है, इसको यही दो. And वो आएगा टाइम. And वो important time है. सैलरी इंक्रीज होने से बेहतर वो टाइम इम्पोर्टेंट है when people say कि she is ethical, उसको ऐसा ही दो. That's more important. So aspire for that, and don't be afraid of refusals.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Anyone? who
Hi,
wants to-
ma'am. I have a question. Preksha.
Preksha,
Hi, Preksha.
please go ahead, Preksha.
Hi, ma'am. Firstly, I must thank you for sharing your journey with us. I'm literally touched. As a journalism student, I've always kept wondering that, why would people come to you? Why will they share their stories with you? It becomes a very responsible thing. The way you put forward all the projects that you've worked on, it's really given me a lot of confidence. So thank you for that, firstly.
My
And
pleasure.
the question that I wanted to ask you is that in this, when you're deciding upon topics to work on or people to interview, many times I come across this feeling that why will someone open up to me? How am I different than the other filmmakers who've come up to them? Or how can I make an impact in this topic? I mean, sometimes you're just scared to take up a topic, thinking that there might be consequences, which there can be, but you want to do it, but at the same time you don't want to. Could you tell us something that can motivate our own selves that stays with us, so that there are things that need to be spoken about, and we can bolster up the courage to take them?
Right. Though I would say that Preksha, you have two questions in there. If I've listened to you carefully enough, your first question was that how do you approach people who may have already said their part to another filmmaker or another journalist, and how do you engage with them? So I'd like to answer that bit first. So when I was making my film called Jasoosni, which is on women detectives in India, I reached out to a lot of private investigators. These are women who are in the business of surveillance, they are spies, they are detectives. And of course, I got a series of, catch me if you can, hide and seek type moments with them where some of them didn't want to reveal their faces, somebody didn't want to talk. But I found another set of people whose names were readily available in the media and who were very willing to be part of the film. I still chose to go ahead with them in my film. So, one is, of course, you have to decide why you want to go with faces of people who have already said their piece. Sometimes it could be that they're the only eyewitnesses, they could be the only people who have experienced something. So, you have to go to the same people, which was my case as well. But when I went to them, uh, I realized that they had already been presented in mainstream media in a particular way. The moment I say women detective, it's so easy, whether you're a woman or a man, to just imagine that these would be people who have like red lipsticks, wear leather pants, are easy to sleep with, could do anything to get their work done. Because we have got that noir detective genre with the woman with the scarlet lips and the side piece. That's all a surveillance based woman does. And even Miss Marple, who is an Agatha Christie creation, is an old woman, right? So there is no space for these women to be not sexualized, not to be objectified. So I decided that I would not make a film that has any sequence which has noir in it. And I faced some criticism and pushback from my producers. They said, how can you make a detective film which is not about investigation? Why would you make a film which is not about, all of this chupna chupana, reveal karna? But I said, ये हो चुका है. That was my instinct. So I wanted to go to them and see कि कुछ नया हो सकता है. So when I went to them and I said, ये हो चुका है, they looked at me and said, हाँ, ये हो चुका है. हमें नहीं करना. They said, we are tired. People come and they say, आप hat पहन लो, आप coat पहन लो, अब आप छुप लाओ, अब आप ऐसे कर लो, अब आप झूठ बोल लो. And she said, I have 6 detectives. One will pretend to be a victim. The other person will pretend to be a murderer. हम आपके लिए sequence कर देंगे. And I was completely shocked because I didn't want any of that. And so I decided that I would have these women just talking to me. So it's a talking heads film, even though it's about detectives. And I stand by it because this is the first time ever in Indian cinema, in the history of documentary, that you see women detectives talking to the camera without any kind of pretense at trying to entertain us. They are entertaining on their own. They say really bizarre things. They challenge your idea of morality. They say some very brave things. They say some very foolish things. But they say what they say. They say who they are to the point that they want to reveal themselves. I'm also very clear. I'm not naive that whoever is talking to me will share everything. So in my last film, I went to them with this idea of not doing what has been done before. And so they were able to sort of be easy with me. So one is to be very clear that you don't want to repeat what has happened. The second is that when you go and you have a story that you want people to talk of, and even though people have gone to them again and again, listen. Listening will give you a lot of cues. And I also find sometimes when people come and feature me, I get bored when they don't ask me interesting questions. There is a stock way to interview me as well. You come to me and you tell me, okay, what film are you working on right now? How does it feel for you as a woman filmmaker? What is the next topic that you're working on? Have you won any award? And khatam. I already know this, right? You already know this about me, which is why you've come to me. Why are we rehashing this? Maybe if you are interested in knowing me, you would probably come to me and say, let's revisit your previous work. Is there any work that resonates with you today? Right? So you're allowing me to think beyond the present. You're allowing me to look at my work with a compassionate eye, because I can also look at my previous work and say, ये क्या बनाया था, right? ये topic क्या है is a different matter. ये क्या बनाया है is a different matter. So do I look back and I look at my work compassionately and say, you know what? I was actually very brave to have made this film. Or, I would like to talk a little bit about how when I was making The Great Indian Jugaad, this man who I was interviewing, and everybody said, he's this amazing person who talks about civil economics, and my camera person were talking about how Jugaad is also a name for sex workers and were mocking me because I was a woman and I was asking questions about Jugaad, and how it took me every reserve to sort of stand my ground. And then because it remained with me and I was so angry that later on I was able to make a creative sequence in my film where women are saying, huh, you call women Jugaad, but it's not funny. The joke is on you. So I didn't say it, but my characters said it. And therefore, of course, I said it. So you find these ways in which you can converse with people and you could get them to talk about things which are interesting. And if it is a story that you're afraid of, if you're afraid of the repercussions, write that into the story. You can always edit it out. Sometimes when I have to write my ideas, I write what I feel is not going to work. And I'd slowly start writing about what will work in it. And then that is how I approach people. Or I go to them and I say, this is not working or that's not there. How can we do this differently? Sometimes people will be kind and oblige. Sometimes they'll just tell you what they tell you. A lot of the times they will come back to you and say, that's a good question. So don't be in a hurry to get everything out. Just ask them a question that allows them to think and not necessarily tell you what everybody knows. I hope this would help you. I tried to sort of
Definitely, ma'am.
connect it, yeah, with something.
Thank
you.
Your work really speaks volumes about your experience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you.
Pass to the question, ma'am, the second one, that how to get the courage in you to work for things where you know you're going to have this evident backlash from the society, probably, or from people around you. How to bolster the courage to take up such a thing?
again, I think part of it is to hearken to the madness bit. Like I said, that you have to sort of sometimes say that I need to not indulge, but I need to entertain this idea and take it to a logical conclusion. The second is, if you feel that there is likely to be a kind of pushback from society, it would be very interesting for you as an exercise to already plan where you want to take your story, whom you want to take the story to, and who are the people who should see it before it is banned, before it is removed, before a platform decides that it's not mainstream. I think working with that in mind can be very useful. uh, Having a campaign without knowing what impact you want is usually being toothless and trying to sort of bite into a hard candy. It will not happen. You need to be able to say that, all right, if I want to create something, I will first look at the person whom I want to transform or impact, or whom I want to benefit. Keeping them in mind, I think you'll find the courage to be able to start embarking on the journey, and also to be able to cushion any kind of backlash that you get. And today we have so many solidarity forums. There are women journalists, uh, not just sort of bloggers, but also kind of listservs that you can write to people, you can try and get support, and be happy to talk to friends who are lawyers, be happy to talk to our teachers, to friends who are engineers, people who can give you perspectives on how they can contribute to making you if you tell such a story. Don't be a person who is, antsy and antsy about society. Get your allies in place, and then start working on the story.
All right. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Ananda, we have a question on our chat box from Ishita. She's asking, ma'am,
Okay.
during the times of quarantine, when we have such
Mhm.
limited visuals, how exactly
Yeah.
do we go about choosing a topic that's unique and visually pleasing at the same time?
Right. So, this is the perfect time to go back to what you had. I think we all have what are amazing digital archives. It's very true that we are now sort of commenting or reflecting on how many kinds of images we have around ourselves. We have objects around us. And that is why creativity is interesting, because it forces you to look at something which is available and to make it look new. And I'll give you a very simple example. A lot of the times we go into archives, we look at newspapers, we look at old photographs. What do we do with them? How do we place them in something that we are trying to create? Why do we give it a certain kind of sepia effect? Or why do we go the opposite end and try and recolor them? Because we're trying to give something that exists the meaning of today. We're trying to give something that exists an interpretation of today. So I would say that no matter what limited set of images you have, or limited set of objects you may have around them, you can play with them. You can look at texts. You can look at objects talking to objects. I don't know if you're familiar with the term the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a term which describes the era of human beings, the era of mankind, because we have interfered in ecology and the environment and changed it forever. We have sped up the melting of ice caps, we have got the Sundarbans flooding. This is the Anthropocenic, the human being has intervened. And there will be something which will be beyond the Anthropocenic, where the human being and their ways of telling stories or looking at the world will not matter. Maybe it will be anthropomorphic. Maybe we will give objects like my spectacles, my earrings a voice. Maybe we will look at birds and animals around us and give them certain kinds of languages. Go back to the world of the Panchatantra and the Jatak tales. Maybe we will do that. Or maybe we will go beyond the human and we will say that there are ways in which we can look at imagery which machines are talking of. How does artificial intelligence create art? It reads what exists and it gives it a new meaning. So go back and look at what we have around us, work with those. Those are kind of conceptual frameworks. And I would also recommend that you should use typography, you should use effects, you should use glitches. You should not be afraid of empty screens, blank canvases, and you should experiment. If you have a question about how to make my visuals interesting, do it, make it. It will automatically start being interesting. It doesn't have to be unique for it. Something really familiar is also so interesting, which is why we respond so well to ads which show dadi ke haath ka khana, or we talk about के आंचल का प्यार. It's familiar है ना? बहुत obvious है, हमारे around है. but आपने उसको क्या रंग दिया, that is what is going to make the impact. So don't feel it's a limitation, feel it's a nice condition, and then play with it.
Excellent
question.
response. Yeah.
We have another question in the chat box which talks about silence. You said sometimes silence is also beautiful, but Preeti wants to say that it is also fragile. If it can't bear the harsh reality, is there a way to stay silent and stay strong, irrespective of the repercussions of harsh reality? Or speaking up is the only last resort at that point of time?
This is a deep existential question as well.
Exactly,
And I
exactly.
mean, and I sort of mean that both at the personal as well as at the creative level. You know, I'm going to quote my mom here. She often says, "एक चुप से सौ सुख." You know, she never says this to me in terms of gender relations at all. It's the exact opposite. I learned it for some reason. But she meant there are times when your silence may be perceived as fragility, but actually it is a demonstration of great patience and restraint. You know, for example, you are respecting an elder and allowing them to say something which may be very hurtful or which may be very insulting. And I use the word insulting deliberately because, again, if I were to go back to the first film, and I said मैंने periods पे film बनाई है, पूरा drawing room silent हो जाता था. ठीक है? I could hear people slurping their chai. One day somebody told me, "Can't you say gender like this?" And I said, "No, it is on periods, and I will say periods." But was silence important था ना? For me to mature, for me to sort of observe that इसमें मजा भी है. How nice, कितना अच्छा था ये uncomfortable silence. और ऐसा silence जितनी बारी पीगा उतनी बारी मेरे लिए अच्छा है. So one is of course इसके साथ आप क्या relationship बनाते हैं. दूसरा है silence when you are forced to be silent. I think that really really problematic. And I think for that, sometimes you wait for an opportunity to speak up or you create an opportunity to speak up. And that could be through your work. You could make notes of, how you will create a piece which will break the silence. Or you can create note how you will help another person break their silence. You can devise activities, you can devise interventions. And finally, you can give silence space in your work. We are very breathless. We want to say it all. We talk over each other. That's our cultural habit. But sometimes silence is, they say sit silently with a friend who may even be grappling with depression, or sit silently with a friend who is happy because your body is a lot. So I would say that somewhere in between, when you sit in silence or you laugh out loud, you'll find your answer.
Absolutely. Dr. Parveen Pannu, a senior faculty member of the department, also has a question for you. Ma'am, do you want to ask directly? I
Hello, good evening.
Hi, Yuki.
go ahead.
Yuki, just read it. That's fine.
All right. So, ma'am wants to ask, please elaborate on the role of sociology and psychology in storytelling in films.
Oh wow, I think they're the pillars. They are the pillars of what we're trying to do. And if you were to even read up papers on the everyday, most of them originate from the sociological, psychological school of thought. Sociology is very important because it not only gives me a sense of what I should prioritize in terms of social change, what are the best ways in terms of visuals, music, and text for me to present something, what are shared symbols or cultural ideas that I can break, what myths can I shatter. Sociology really sort of gives me a lot of masala to work with, besides, of course, the framework and the grounding. And psychology is important because it's very important for me to be sensitive to the portraits that I'm trying to present, to the psychology of the people who participate, the psychological impact that can occur based on the material that I show, because visuals can speak many more words. So when we say picture is worth 1,000 words, sometimes it's shockingly on point, particularly if it is, say, photographs that are leaked of you when you are vulnerable, or if it is a moment which is unique in time, like an athlete winning or something, like a moment of an image can really say a lot. And you have to be very careful about why that image, how you're talking about that image, how you're presenting that image. And that is, of course, outward. But I think sociology and psychology are very important for me to look at my own role. What is my role as a creator, a filmmaker, or a teacher in society? Sociologically, where am I in the pecking order? And that's a difficult question to answer, because sometimes I'm so economically weak that what I say and do probably not have the kind of ripple effect I want. When somebody who has, say, 1 million fans on YouTube says something, it'll probably have greater impact. But do I stop doing my part? Or how do I try and sort of engage with that kind of mindset? Sociology has been important for me as a woman filmmaker, because I've had to sometimes really fight and talk about how women are represented. And there was this film that I was doing where I was filming this young woman entrepreneur. She had a very modest background. She had a very small workshop, but from being a seamstress, she had now become a small boutique, which to my mind is a phenomenal journey for somebody who comes from a very small village in Uttar Pradesh. And trying to shoot a sequence of her walking in the city, because she was talking about how she will make her father proud, because her whole family was against her for having come to the city. And she said, I will make a mark for myself in this city. And we said, let's take her out into the city and show her walking. And we were shooting her against the setting skies, and she was walking. And the cinematographer at one point in time told me, I can't film. I said, what do you mean you can't film? The sun is setting? This is the magic hour. If we don't film her now, I can't film. I don't have lights. So he said, nahi, she's reminding me of a sex worker. Lipstick पहन के अंधेरे में वो चल रही है, वो तो वही होती है. And I remember taking like a mini lesson in sociology right there and then and telling him, what do you mean वही होती है? And what is वही? वो भी औरतें हैं. They also belong to our city. They also do a certain kind of, daily traversing of the cityscape. And why is it that a woman who's wearing lipstick and walking against the city should only be that? Who told us कि इस image का यही meaning रहेगा, जन जन्मांतर तक? And who told you कि तुम्हारे लेंस के थ्रू तुम किसी को देखो तो तुम्हें वो औरत वही दिखे, और तुम्हें ये क्यों लग रहा है कि वो वैसी है तो वो कोट एंड कोट गलत है? मैंने कहा शूट तो हम यही करेंगे. And so then he said, पर मैं क्या करूं? I can't get it out of my head. So I discussed with him. I said, what is it in your camera and your gaze which is making you look at her like that? And so then he said, I don't know, I'm looking down upon her. So I said, fine, then your camera goes down and starts looking up at her. And I said, she will walk, let the sun set. Now I want the light even harsher on her as she walks across the frame. And she was 4 feet nothing. But that's one of my most favorite sequences, because as she walks, the lights start dimming. She looks like this woman who knows her mind when she's walking in the city. I changed the meaning of that image, that process there and then, because I was aware of the sociology of how images and sex work and the psychology of how we perceive women comes into play. Right. So these two disciplines are, I think, critical to what I do. And I may not necessarily talk the talk. I may not be saying, okay, I'm looking at transactional psychology or behavioral psychology, but subliminally, those are exactly the buttons I'm pushing. And those are exactly the buttons any creative person, with or without degrees, will be working on. And finally, I think sociology is very important, not just to look at communities and people that I study, but the sociology of the set. I have had people working with me who have run away from home when they were 10 years of age and are the best lighting persons and best cinematographers I will ever meet. No film school will teach them that. So they belong to a certain sociological milieu, but they bring the best creative milieu, which studies and a full belly, the best meal, and the best clothes will never give you. Perspective is mediated by life experience. And perspective is what wins when you work in this field. Then everything else doesn't matter. Then you can be, Queen of England, but it will not matter. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Ananda. What a beautiful explanation. And very correctly said that the way we look at, the gaze which we have, as Dora Mulvey also mentioned, the kind of gaze which men follow, and male gaze, and sociology, psychology, filmmaking, communication, human rights. So it's not about a specialization in any particular stream, but it's a combination of all the sciences, all the arts together when we are making a film. A film is beyond. Film is also science. Film is also now digital. Is information technology also. So it's a combination of all the subjects together. The series of asking questions will never ever end because we have such an amazing speaker with us with such a nice knowledge, information which she has shared with us, her journey, and it's not only about your films, Anna. It's also about as a woman filmmaker, what all challenges you have faced, how you have coped with them, and how beautifully you were able to translate gender issues, social issues, human rights issues, and all the laurels which you have with all the awards you have gained because of these films make a lot of difference. And I'm sure all our students who are they have the charm of making films. They are using their cameras. As a student films, when they produce student films, they come up with so brilliant ideas. And I hope they have got inspiration from your talk. Thank you very much for taking out this time. And we expect when the world will resume and come back to normal, whatever normal it will be, I'll invite you to college and you can have a face-to-face interaction with me.
Thank you. I'd love to do that. And thank you so much. And Yuki, I do want to say that my journey began with you, and it's very nice to have been able to reflect upon it with you. So thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for
yes,
your
we did our
attention.
students' film together. Our students' project was together.
Absolutely, absolutely. My graduation film was also together. Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you.
So
Thank you
much.
for being with
Thank you,
me.
Anandana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good weekend.